Jennifer, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
My pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
So let's get started with kind of an overview of everything that Volunteers of America is doing. I know that you're doing way more than even I know about, and I'm familiar with a lot of your work, but let people know about some of the programs and services that you all are offering, especially right now.
Sure. So Volunteers of America is one of the region's oldest, largest, most diverse not-for-profit businesses. We serve about 26,000 individuals throughout our region every year. And here in Kentucky, we provide supports to veterans who have bravely served our country but come home with some challenges around finding civilian employment, behavioral health challenges, sometimes housing instability. So we're actually contracted through the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs and the U.S. Department of Labor to work with veterans to help facilitate workforce reentry, as well as to provide intensive case management and wraparound services. So we have a pretty large veteran services division in the organization, and we're really proud to employ veterans to serve veterans. We think that cultural competency is so important. And actually, as we're preparing for Veterans Day, we're going to be rolling out a new sub-brand of this division called VOA Honor. And it really speaks to the pride and honor we have in serving those who have served our country. So we also here in Kentucky are working on issues associated with homeless and housing instability. We work with families who were affected by homelessness as well as low-income seniors, and we provide emergency housing, transitional housing, as well as permanent housing supports to those individuals who are experiencing housing instability. So that's another entire division of our organization called VOA Home. We also are in the behavioral health space, and this is in our VOA Recovery division, where we provide residential long-term supportive services to a variety of populations. We serve in that division. We also serve veterans. We have a residential unit just for male veterans. We also serve a reentry population, and we're really proud to be working with the Department of Corrections to take care of guys who have been incarcerated, arrested and incarcerated for substance use disorder related crimes. They get to come to treatment, and not only do we deal with their substance use disorder and underlying issues of trauma or behavioral health issues, we also help them find work, find stable housing, and reunite with their families and in their communities. We're also really proud in this division to support women who are pregnant and parenting. Unfortunately, we know that women of childbearing age are a population that have been deeply affected by the opioid crisis. That's a part of our mission that has expanded. We opened our newest Freedom House program earlier this year, the same month that the pandemic descended on the nation and on Kentucky. We were opening a Freedom House program in Clay County, Kentucky for women and their families. And that's a residential program that allows moms to bring their kids into treatment as an alternative to their kids having to go into out-of-home placements or foster care. And then two other divisions of our organization. One is our public health division. Here we provide outreach for HIV prevention, education, and testing. We are funded through the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, as well as the State Department of Public Health. And we target those populations that, according to the CDC, are highest at risk for contracting HIV. And we test them. We can do a confirmatory test and get results in under 10 minutes, and then link people into care if they're positive. And of course, we know there's such a high correlation between the opioid crisis and the public health crisis that is both HIV and hepatitis C. Finally, VOA Justice is where our restorative justice services are located. And we're really proud to be providing those services in Jefferson County, as well as in southeastern Kentucky, where we're working with youth who would otherwise be entangled in the criminal justice system. And we know that there is a school to prison pipeline for youth who may start emerging with behavioral problems in the school system, who ultimately may find themselves in the juvenile justice system and then graduate to the adult system. this program intervenes in the most proactive way possible and the most meaningful way possible, and ultimately reduces recidivism and really saves taxpayer costs, because our program is literally 1/3 of what it costs for kids to go through the traditional juvenile justice system. So that's kind of an overview. That's a lot, but that's an overview of the work that we're doing throughout Kentucky.
It is a lot, but that's incredible. I mean, that's so many wonderful things in so many great areas. And today I want to focus in particular on recovery. The Kentucky Chamber has recently launched our Kentucky Comeback Initiative. The Kentucky Chamber and VOA work really well together on especially criminal justice issues and recovery issues. But let's talk about the pandemic. In Kentucky, we've had the pandemic hurt all aspects of our state. Every single thing has been affected, but especially unemployment rates. And I recently read for every 1 percentage point that unemployment goes up, then 3.6% increase in overdose deaths. That's a huge jump. And we can definitely see it in Kentucky as our overdose deaths have increased during the pandemic. So how do we, with the pandemic, how has it impacted you all in your facilities, and how do we move forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. We are deeply concerned about the lingering effects of COVID-19 on this population that is truly so vulnerable to relapse or return to use. The isolating effects of COVID is really such a key trigger for relapse. And so as people are leaving the workforce and they are really isolated in their own homes and vulnerable to returning to use, we see the consequences of that. We also know that it is challenging for folks to consider coming into a residential program when there is risk around being in a residential setting with other people. So we have really been marketing our programs as a very safe alternative. It is much safer to risk coming to treatment and dealing with the potential COVID response versus being out of treatment and dealing with potential overdose. We have worked with our referral partners to communicate that we have aggressively and honestly immediately back in early March implemented the most rigorous protocols that have kept our residential environments very safe. We had a situation recently in one of our programs that, I guess, what are we, 7 months into this pandemic? This was the first time we had a client test positive within one of our residential programs. And we take care of about 600 people in residence on a daily basis. We have about 650 employees, and our positivity rate has been extremely low. And I credit our frontline heroes who have been hyper vigilant and their adherence to all of the protocols. But we did have just 2 weeks ago, someone test positive in one of our residential programs. We swooped in, immediately contained that. We really celebrated that to both all of our internal clients and staff, but also to our referral partners to reiterate that the risk of not being in treatment is so great right now. The lethality and risk is so high for those who are not in treatment. We really want to welcome people and urge people to come into treatment.
Absolutely. And especially with the unemployment piece, we know that employment is such a critical aspect of making sure that people stay in recovery in particular. And so, like you said, as we're seeing them be unemployed and then isolated, that's an even bigger problem. But even outside of the pandemic, employment is so critical in this fight. So especially with you all's services, how do you help people get to where they need to be, and how do you help them move forward?
We recognize that employment is an absolutely essential component of a long-term plan of recovery, so much so that we literally integrate employment goals into the master treatment plan. So you don't get to come to Volunteers of America and go through treatment and leave without a job. You actually have to phase up through a process of returning to work, and if not to work, returning to an educational program. So that is integrated into how we phase people through our program. They have to meet certain milestones. And obviously the reason for that is that's a sign of stability. That's a sign of their readiness to become more independent, to live in the community again, independent financially, but also independent emotionally and logistically. Having employment really speaks to the overall stabilizing effects of having a structured activity, having accountability and responsibility that guides every single day, having people that count on you, having to show up and be present, and give your mind and body something else to focus on is just so critical. So we really believe strongly in workforce reentry as a key part of long-term recovery, and work with a lot of second chance or transformational employers who we're proud to partner with. And I just want to say how much I've appreciated and been impressed by the Chamber's real leadership, just authentically embracing this as something that should no longer be stigmatized. This is something for us to be celebrating. I know we in Southeastern Kentucky have recently invested, along with a couple of other individuals and groups in town, in a director of SOAR position for Manchester, Kentucky. And she has already connected with Sonia and Ashley to talk about how we can make Manchester another place where we're celebrating transformational employment and really bringing more partners to the table. So we love all of the work that the Chamber's doing. We're a proud partner, and just can't say enough about the important role that work plays in long-term recovery.
Absolutely. And we really appreciate that. And Sonia and Ashley, who you mentioned on our workforce center team with the response team, they are absolutely incredible, and they're doing some incredible work across the state. So we're very proud of that. Now let's talk about some of the strides that Kentucky has. Kentucky had a lot of strides made on this front because of the things that people like you are doing, because of the things that the Chamber is doing. The pandemic has put us back a couple steps. I think everyone can agree. So how do we get back to making progress? I think that we're starting to kind of turn a corner in terms of the pandemic. People are feeling more comfortable, I'm sure, even to go to things like AA meetings or anything like that. But still, we're not where we need to be, and we're seeing more overdose deaths and things like that. So how do we get back to where we need to be?
Well, I think the first thing is to adhere to all the guidance to reduce contacts and to mask up. Unfortunately, today it's October 29th. Many of our counties in Kentucky are in the red zone and surging. We are looking at that data county by county, and looking at how we can encourage people to follow the governor's recommendations so that we can stabilize again. I think what we will show is that once we're all willing to align around those recommendations or that advice, we can show measurable progress to being in a more stable place. Once we stabilize, then we can resume a lot of the activities and focus on building these systems that we've been building in Kentucky. I don't like to think of this as we're taking a lot of steps back, obviously, and I know clearly the pandemic has affected every facet of our economy, every facet of life. And yet, because of the tremendous progress that has been made in Kentucky in aligning workforce, economic development, the recovery community work, a lot of the leadership that the Chamber has frankly provided in being a convener and bringing us together to work in this very multi-sector way, we can continue to use that foundation to move forward in a positive way. But we have to be stable first. And unfortunately, we see this data that shows that we are not quite there yet. I am very worried about what that means for these next few months, because we know that the holidays can be particularly risky for people who are in new recovery or people who have left treatment. And particularly if they're not able to be around a supportive family system, they are more isolated if they are unable to return to the workforce. So I'm deeply concerned about these next few months. All the more reason why I feel obligated to talk about the importance of doing all that we can to follow the guidance right now.
That's a very good point, because the holidays and things are going to be an incredibly difficult time for everyone, but especially people in recovery. And on that,
Absolutely.
on that same kind of topic, I want to talk about family. And I've heard I didn't even think about it until I interviewed Kenneth Bearden, who's with ARC, who talked about the fact that a lot of women don't end up seeking treatment because they have children and they can't take their children with them. He was a single father who his family ended up taking care of his kid and he went to treatment. But there are mothers out there who can't or feel like they can't, but you all are really providing that service for them. So I'd love to hear more about that initiative from you guys.
Yeah, so we know that women are unfortunately have been faced in the past with this impossible decision. Do you go to residential treatment? And if so, what do you do with your kids? Or do you try to avoid that treatment option and take care of your kids? That is a decision no parent should have to make. Back in the 90s, and I'm so proud of Volunteers of America, this happened long before I became a part of this organization, but there was a concerted effort made to offer very gender specialized treatment. And at that time, back in the 90s, frankly, the field of addiction services was just awakened to the fact that women had unique needs different men. If you think about the history of the recovery movement, it took a few decades after Bill Wilson started AA for there to be a recognition that women were dealing with alcoholism and addiction, because that population in particular were very stigmatized. So back in the 90s, Volunteers of America began to offer gender specific services and then realized in that effort that women pregnant and parenting had even more complex needs. And so we started Freedom House back in the mid 90s. This was during the age of the crack cocaine epidemic. And we had about 10 to 12 beds at a time in Jefferson County that enabled women to come to treatment, bring their kids with them. If they didn't have kids already but were pregnant, they could bring their baby home from the hospital, deliver a healthy baby. That program is one that has been in high demand over the past 5 or so years here in Kentucky. So we have tripled our capacity in Jefferson County. We have become nationally recognized. We were one of 7 providers across the nation to get certified last year from the American Society of Addiction Medicine. That we met and exceeded all of their best practice standards. And that enabled us to get grants to be able to expand our mission into a part of Kentucky that desperately needed these services. So we ended up opening the program that I referenced earlier, the Freedom House in Clay County. Since that time, we have been awarded another SAMHSA grant. We had Leader McConnell along with President Stivers and President Capilouto, because UK is our research partner on this grant. They joined us for a ceremony in August where we announced we just opened in March, we're already doubling the capacity of that program because we have seen high demand for women and their kids to get to come to treatment. So this family-focused environment is really exceptional. I wish we could show some pictures or video of it because it is not an institution. It is truly a home. We want women to be able to rest, to be still and quiet, to deal with the trauma, to deal with the underlying substance use disorder, and for their kids to get treatment. This is primary prevention for kids. Having the framework to be able to talk about the impact of addiction on a young person. So we do that in a very age appropriate, developmentally appropriate way, and give them the tools and the words so they too can heal from the trauma of addiction. So it's a beautiful program. We've already delivered our first healthy baby in Manchester. We've had 2 women graduate. We even had our first graduate featured in People magazine last week.
Wow.
Which was so neat. I know. We have, so I have to tell you this quick story. We have a woman who oversees our intake department. She's literally the first person people talk to when they reach out for help. Her name is Christina, and Christina is brilliant in this role. She recognizes the fear in people's voice. She recognizes the hesitation, and she uniquely can speak to the importance of taking that next step, because just a few years ago, it was Christina reaching out to VOA for help. So she is one of our peer support specialists today, having graduated from Freedom House. So she knows better than anyone what that recovery journey is about. So Christina is the person that answered the call when Brittany called to get into our Manchester program. And so Christina and Brittany were featured in People magazine last week and told their recovery stories. And it's such a great example too of this urban rural bridge that we've been building to say, it doesn't matter if you're in Louisville or Manchester, you deserve access to care. There is a solution for you that is family focused and comprehensive. So we partner with local hospitals to make sure that we have all the OB supports to deliver these babies. And we take care of these families for the long haul. And that includes providing them some recovery housing, because we know as moms re-enter the workforce, they need some additional supports to be successful. I loved Ashley's recent letter to the editor about the impact of women, particularly with COVID, leaving in droves from the workforce. Well, think about these fragile moms who are in new recovery, who have a little one, who may have older kids. They need a lot of supports to create the stability that they need so that they can stay in the workforce. And we're really committed to making sure that we accompany them on that journey and provide those supports along the way.
That's incredible. And you make such a good point about the kids in particular. You know, the more I'm learning as I get into this as well, especially with Kentucky Comeback, is that it starts young, younger than most of us would think. And it usually is a result of trauma or mental illness that goes unaddressed. And even yesterday we had our recovery conference and someone said, teenagers don't talk to you about how they feel. Even younger kids, they just say, everything's fine, I'm fine, you know? And so it's critically important to address at that stage too, especially if they've had the trauma of dealing with someone who's already been addicted. So I think that's
absolutely.
So finally, to wrap everything up, I want to talk about your biggest priorities moving forward for veterans of Volunteers of America, and just you personally. How do you see the next, I guess, let's say for 2021, what are your biggest priorities?
Yeah, so we are already preparing for expansion of our behavioral health services and recovery housing. In light of everything that we've been talking about today, we know that there's going to be greater demand for our services now, and particularly as we start rebounding from the pandemic. So we are looking at ways that we can go ahead and start building out capacity and not be caught off guard by that. We can see the crystal ball. We know that there's going to be additional needs that we can serve. And then the other big part of expansion has to do with restorative justice. So just out this week, a report that shows Kentucky is now 7th in the nation in terms of rates of incarceration. We are incarcerating women at 2 times the rate of the national average. We know substance use disorder is a key driver of those data points. And we have solutions. We have solutions that are more cost effective and more effective at treating substance use disorder. So we're really committed on the side of this issue that is the intersection of criminal justice and substance use disorder. And so we want to build out capacity there, but we also know that part of any type of criminal justice reform has to start with young people. To your earlier point about early prevention, even younger than we may realize, that's the storyline for restorative justice, where we're taking kids as they're starting to show these signs and symptoms of behavioral problems before they get labeled and tagged in the system. And that further entrenches or reinforces this label that they then start having to live up to. We want to intervene early. So we look forward to being able to continue this pilot project in southeastern Kentucky, being able to show that we can get results next year to demonstrate to the General Assembly that this is an investment that makes sense for Kentucky, that we can reduce recidivism and save cost at the same time. So those are some of our priorities: expansion, 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 and being able to take care of some of these complex needs that have a lot of intersectionality to them.
It's wonderful. And expansion is so key, but also, I don't know how you guys are doing it. You're doing so much incredible work, and it's so great to hear about it today. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today.
Thank you so much.